Today I want to talk to you about family roots. When you're born again, you become part of a new family, the family of God. You enter God's kingdom and so you come under God's rule, but you also become part of His family. He is your father and you are His child. It's wonderful to know that you belong to a family. When I was born again, some of my family rejected my newfound faith, but I discovered that I had a spiritual family, which was in some ways closer to me than my natural family. As you grow up in a family, you get to know their ways, their background, their culture, and your ancestry. These days, there is a lot of interest in ancestry, and it's interesting to delve into the past. It helps you to identify who you are and to connect to your roots. We all like to be connected. Being in God's family is no different. Knowing the roots of Christianity will help you to grow and identify how you fit in. The best way to find out about God's family is, of course, to read the Bible. 2/3 of it is what we call the Old Testament, and this is largely the history of Israel and the Jewish people. Our Christian roots are undoubtedly Jewish, and understanding this will help you to get closer to Jesus, who was and is, of course, a Jew. The early Christians were all Jewish, and at first they did not even realize that the gospel was for the whole world. God's plan from the start was to use Israel and the Jewish people to spread His message of salvation. God sees the peoples of the world in two groups, Jew and Gentile. It's not that He favours the Jews. In fact, He's put upon them a great responsibility, which they've struggled to fulfill. He loves all people the same, but gives different tasks to different people groups. When we recognise the plan of God for the world, then things begin to fall into place. Sadly, as Gentiles began to join the early church, which, by the way, is the body of believers, not a building or a denomination, some turned against the Jews and wanted to disconnect from them. In fact, they began to blame them for the death of Jesus, which was ridiculous because it was all part of God's plan. He had to die to be the sin sacrifice for us all. On the other hand, some Jews in the early church wanted these believing Gentiles to become Jews. The Apostle Paul wrote strongly against this in his letters, particularly the one to the Galatians. I'm sure you're all aware of the sad history of the persecution of the Jewish people through such things as the Inquisition, the pogroms, the Holocaust, right up to the present day when anti-Semitism is still rife in the world. This is a spiritual battle. The enemy of God, the devil, opposes the plan and purposes of God, and therefore he sets himself and his agents against the people of God. So we need to know what is the plan of God for the world so that we can cooperate with Him and not unwittingly be deceived and end up serving the devil's purposes. We can know God's plan by reading the Bible prayerfully and receiving good teaching. I can give you some brief and basic guidance, but I recommend you search for yourself to understand how Israel and the Jewish people fit into God's plan. In fact, they are a pivotal part of it. The regathering and establishment of the nation of Israel in 1948 was a miraculous fulfillment of prophecy. God made an everlasting covenant with Abraham, the father of the Jewish people, and He has preserved them through centuries against all odds. God said to Abraham, "I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Throughout the Old Testament, God speaks about this covenant that he made, which covers both the physical land and the people. He confirmed and repeated it with Abraham's son and grandson, Isaac and Jacob, and their descendants after them. He gave them laws to live by, and when the Jewish people ignored or disobeyed, they were punished, and God often used other nations to chastise them. They've been reduced in number and scattered, but he has never forgotten the covenant he made and has always had mercy on them and restored them. God has never dealt with any other nation in the way he has dealt with Israel. He has given them an awesome privilege and responsibility. Yes, they are a special people, but it means that God requires more of them, and they have an obligation to be loyal to him, which other nations do not have. They are blessed more, but they also suffer more. No one nation has suffered so much down the centuries as the Jews have. Scripture says in Deuteronomy, "Did any people ever hear the voice of God speaking out in the midst of the fire as you have heard, and live? Or did God ever try to go and take for himself a nation from the midst of another nation by trials, signs, wonders, war, terrors? Today the Lord has proclaimed you to be his special people, just as he promised you, that you should keep all his commandments, and that he will set you high above all nations which he has made, that you may be a holy people to the Lord your God." The Jews are a unique people. Israel is not like any other nation. Only when we begin to acknowledge this can we begin to understand God's plan for the world and how we, as part of God's family, fit in. All God's dealings with Israel and the Jewish people are not for their sake, but for his own sake and for the world's sake. He speaks through the prophet Ezekiel in this way. "So I scattered them among the nations. I judged them according to their ways and their deeds. When they came to the nations wherever they went, they profaned my holy name, when they said of them, 'These are the people of the Lord,' and yet they have gone out of his land. But I had concern for my holy name, which the house of Israel had profaned. I will sanctify my great name, when I am hallowed in you before their eyes. For I will take you from among the nations, gather you out of all countries, and bring you to your own land. Then I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you shall be clean. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you." Over the last 70 years, God has been doing this, gathering the Jews from the nations and bringing them back to their own land. God uses the Jewish people to show himself to the world, to demonstrate his character and his faithfulness.